welcome to Brask this nice Monday morning. Not that it was brilliant when I set off, but the sun's shining now. I will remind you all it is live streamed now. So you know, everything's recorded and written down. So please take care. Anything else we need to add? No. Okay. If we can move on, we'll have apologies for absence.
We have apologies from Clive Pearson, Jim Bailey and Christine Robertson.
Thank you. Any more for anybody? No. The public minutes of the meeting held on 29th of August 23. Has everybody read and digested, and is there any comments coming out of this? Do I sign those with correct record?
All right, mate.
Thank you very much. Right, members are reminded it's their responsibility to declare any nature of any personal, prejudicial or disclosable interests relating to any agenda item immediately prior to its consideration, and are encouraged to complete a written declaration using the form provided. And Judith has those forms over there. Emergency evacuation procedure. When members exit the building and yes, congregate on the lawn in front of the building. I was forgetting that. So that everyone can be counted and verified. Item 5, exclusion of the public from the meeting during consideration of items 15 and 16 on the grounds that involves likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 1 and 2, part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Are we in favour of that?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We move on to item 6. Ask Gareth and Grant Thornton to give an update. Thank you very much, Gareth.
Thanks very much, Chair. Before I go through the VFM report that you've got before you today, members, I'll just give a brief update on where we're at with the audit of the 22-23 accounts. So members will recall my colleague Talina presented our ISA 260 report to this committee back at the end of August. And in essence, the accounts audit had been delivered as planned with Pete and Sandra and finance colleagues during July and early August. And there were just a few areas to conclude on before we could sign off the accounts. Just to update members where we're at now in the sort of middle of November. So all the issues that could be dealt with and resolved between ourselves and Pete's team have now been done. So that's a positive. Some changes have been put through the accounts, but importantly, none of those changes affect usable reserves for members. So that's a really key point to note. I still haven't signed off the accounts yet, Chair, because we are still awaiting the assurance letter from the auditors of North York's pension fund. We are led to believe that letter will be issued before the end of this month. If it is, and if there are no significant issues contained within it, then the plan is to sign off the accounts after December's authority meeting, Chair. So we're nearly there. And as I say, you know, no audit issues that impact on usable reserves in terms of the accounts. So that's the accounts, Chair. This report obviously deals with the other aspect of our external audit work, which is the value for money arrangements review, and you've got our detailed report in front of you today. Again, just drawing out some key messages from this, Chair. Firstly, on the exec summary on page 3, we've got a summary table there in terms of the 3 themes that we base our review on. It's important to note that we've not found any significant weakness areas and therefore not had to raise any key level recommendations. across those three themes of financial sustainability, governance, and economy, efficiency and effectiveness, the 3 E's, are effectively your sort of performance management, if you like. There are a small number of improvement level recommendations that have been raised. So the improvement level recommendations are the sort of low level ones where we're raising things that enhance existing arrangements, and they're in the governance and 3 E's themes. So just briefly sort of turning the pages here, section 3 of the report that starts on page 6 is our summary of the financial sustainability arrangements of the authority. As I say, we've not raised any recommendations in that area. We see the regular reporting to this committee and elsewhere from Pete as section 151 officer, the updates to the MTFS, the regular quarterly updates to members. There's a summary position on page 8 from your MTFS that looks at the projected surplus and deficit in the current and future years. That, you know, there's expected to be a small surplus to be delivered, and we know not just at the authority but across the board at all our clients from 25-26 onwards that the position is quite uncertain, but that's in the medium to long term. So, you know, there's no significant issue from our perspective in terms of where the authority is from an MTFS point of view. And also we make reference in this section to the strengthening of the authority's contingency reserve position, general reserve position, which we see as a positive, and we note the plans to strengthen that further going forward. The next section is on governance, section 5, that commences on page 12. And again, no real issues of concern to raise throughout governance. Overall, solid, adequate governance arrangements in place from our perspective. We have raised a couple of improvement recommendations there, one around the risk register, sort of strengthening the link, I guess, to the authority's overall corporate objectives. And I guess part of that will be linked through your relationship with the new unitary, who, as we understand it, they're going through an update around their risk management arrangements as well. And then just a reminder around some of the key documents, making sure they're kept up to date and relevant in terms of key governance documents, both of which management has agreed on page 16. And then the last theme, the 3 E's, starts the following page 17. And again, no significant areas of concern, Chair. We have just raised one improvement recommendation in section 8 on page 20, which is to look at, I guess, the actions against those 72 key milestones in the authority's business plan, in terms of what action is going to be taken to bring those that are perhaps off track or behind target, and to get those back onto target. And again, management has accepted that recommendation. We followed up the 2 recommendations, Chair, from the prior year in section 9 on page 21. Highlight both as partially agreed, but we expect both of them to be fully agreed in the next couple of months. So we're aware that the SLA with the new unitary, from a legal point of view in terms of the monitoring officer, has been agreed, and the financial services one we're expecting to be agreed very shortly. And then the self-assessment review for this committee we're expecting to take place in February 24. So at your next meeting, in effect. So that, I guess, is the overview of the VFM report. As I say, no significant areas of concern for me to bring to this committee's attention. 1 or 2 improvement recommendations to enhance existing arrangements. And I'll just pause at that point, Chair, obviously, to take any questions.
Thank you, Gareth. A glowing report from our point of view, anyway. And thank you to you and Pete for working so well together. We just hope that Mazars can work as well with us. I understand you maybe know a bit about Mazars, Pete, but have you worked with them? Okay, thank you. Any questions for Gareth before we move forward? Well,
The comment, really. Excuse me. Yeah. As Colin said, it really is good that you know, it's a great report, and it's good to see that North Yorkshire Moors National Parks actually do you know, the best value for money. I mean, that's really a good story for us, and good governance. Thank you very much for the report. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, obviously this is my last meeting, so you know, I'd like to put on record certainly my thanks to you know, officers and members for their engagement in the audit process over those 5 years. So obviously worked very closely with Pete and with Sandra, but there are others, you know, Ian, Bryony, Tom as chief exec. You know, the audit process has gone well, I think, over those 5 years, but obviously that's a two-way thing, Chair. And we've certainly had a high level of engagement throughout each of the 5 years, you know, which is not always the case as external auditors, and those members who sit on other audit committees are probably aware of the huge you know, backlog and issues in terms of out-of-date accounts across the country, and you know, we've not had that issue at North York Moors in that time. So you know, sad that we'll be moving on, but just wanted to put that on record, Chair, that we've always had a good, you know, robust, independent but professional working relationship with colleagues and members here at the park. Thank you, Chair.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, the work you've put in and the diligence in looking through everything to give us that good check and health check, really, and keep us on the right track is brilliant, really, from our point of view. And we thank Pete and yourselves for working closely together to put them together and come out. I know some maybe don't come out as well, but with working together we can move forward. And thank you very much anyway for all the work you've done for us. I hope in future we can work just as well with the new.
You don't know, Terry, that's a 5-year contract, so you may see GT again, Kevin.
Well, I won't say anything, but thank you very much anyway. Yes. Any more comments for Gareth? Anyway, again, thank you very much. If we don't see you again, but I know you say you'll be around this area, so keeping an eye on us. Absolutely. And thanks very much to Pete and his team for working with you. If we can move on then to quarter two finance update. I believe this will be you, Pete.
Yeah, indeed. So no presentation on this, which is always a good sign. It means it's a bit uneventful, which is a good thing. So just to draw attention to just a few of the highlights at Q2, you'll remember at Q1 we had a 10k deficit position against the balanced budget. So that was 10k that we needed to find, and as officers we said we'd continue to look for that. Q2 has a 19k surplus position, which is good news. Main drivers of that, we've seen some income improvements in there in planning. We were probably quite cautious at Q1 around the planning position. We've seen that improve a little bit. We've also seen car parking do well, but we are being cautious around forecasting that at the moment, given the ability for that to downturn on uncertain conditions. So we'll have a look at that at Q3. And then we've got a couple of areas of savings in there as well that have just helped to push that into that surplus position. No view at the moment to use that surplus position for anything. We'll have a look at Q3 and see where we are at that point in terms of the overall. A couple of points just worth noting in the report. Some external funding recent successes aren't included at Q2 at the moment in the budget position, just purely because of timing of the production of the report and notification of those coming through. So they'll be included at Q3. We've got good progress on projects throughout. Section 106 in particular is overspending its annual allocation in almost all areas, which means it's eating into some of those sort of previous years allocations, which is really good news. And that's in particular for sort of core policy B for the second year in a row at the moment. So that's really progressing very well. In the period, we sold the Beaconsfield property and acquired the land, and the money is flowing through for that. You'll be able to see in the reserves there's a contribution to reserves, which is the net number for that. And then additional to that, just a good report at the moment. I think it just illustrates quite tight to budgets. From an expenditure point of view, we really are spending on profile largely, and very much sort of quite tight now around expenditure budgets, and we obviously hope to continue that through Q3 and Q4. So yeah, just a good position, relatively uneventful, and a good news story.
Any comments for Pete? I know we were just 2 points, if I can make it. We were going to give a helping hand to the Moors bus, but they refused this. Is that gone back into reserves, or are we planning to use that somewhere else?
I mean, at the moment, we haven't, in Q2 report, which we're looking at the moment, there is no reallocation of those monies for the moment, simply because of the timing of the report compared to any conversations that are ongoing. We might look at that at Q3, but I will hand to Tom just in case you want to add anything.
Yeah, I mean, just to clarify. So, since the discussion at Frask in April or May, I can't remember the exact date of the meeting where we talked about the 440k one-off funding that we'd received from DEFRA, we made an allocation of 15,000 in for that funding to support a review of targeted transport, and we've been in discussion with the director of Moorsbus about whether that fund could support them in looking at the strategy of Moorsbus going forward, and they've confirmed that they don't wish to use that funding to support a strategic review of Moorsbus. So that's just to clarify the position. I'm in conversation with Joel Brookfield, who of course is our relatively new Director of Recreation and Wellbeing, about whether he and his team would welcome conducting some form of review of our targeted transport provision, which members will be reasonably familiar with, I hope. Joel's yet to make I think a firm view on that, but I think we'll want to seek some advice from our Recreation and Wellbeing Forum, which I know had a brief conversation when it met a few weeks ago about that, and I think we'll come back to it at some point, possibly in the new year. So I think for the moment we'll hold off making a decision about whether we release that back to reserves or not. Okay.
Any comment? Go on, Patrick.
Quick question, thanks, Chair. Just the 5,000 savings in apprentices. You're not saying there we're having fewer apprentices, just that they're younger, so not the same numbers of apprentices, they're just profile, is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So the apprentice saving, what we put in the budget is, depending on the age of the apprentice we take on, there can be different variants in salary, which is kind of a standard set salary for apprentice schemes. And the budget is set at a level to make sure that it's enough to cater for if we get older apprentices coming in. The current cohorts at the moment is a reduced number of younger, so it's actually below budget this year. But that's a temporary saving effectively for this cohort. In future, we may have apprentices of older ages that get taken on, and therefore the budget gets used up. So it just depends on the relevant cohort, and the budget caters for a reasonable position of that age range.
Thank you, because the work we do with apprentices.
Yes.
So
yeah, numbers remain the same.
Welcome.
You mentioned the 106 money, and it's really nice to see that we're getting through the money that we've been allocated and going back to some of the money that we haven't spent in previous years. Is this sort of the beginning of a continuing trend? We've expressed a bit of concern in the past about how we're spending the money. Is it sort of, is this a permanent thing? In the past, Ryan, we've sort of said there's a lot of uncertainty about things like tree planting and that. Does this indicate hopefully a more permanent change?
Where is the microphone?
Right.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, at the moment, we're making really good progress with our land management community, and they're wanting to engage with us and do plenty of work. I mean, all of our Section 106 spend really relies on the capacity of our landowning community to want to work with us, and we've got some really good staff in our team now who have got the time to spend talking to landowners, and some of the agreements that we're delivering this year we might have been talking about for 2 or 3 years, and I think that's part of the challenge really, is to sort of get landowners ready to be able to take on those agreements. So all I can say is that we're doing really well now. I don't know what that future might look like. But you know, we're also being quite innovative in the way we're spending the money as well, and looking for different types of schemes that deliver the same outcomes, so that we can be a bit more flexible with the money, but always bearing in mind that it's got to meet the Section 106 criteria.
It's really good news. Well done.
Thank you, Brian. David, you want?
Yeah, just a comment, Mr. Chairman. I think it's very encouraging to see that car parking income has risen considerably in the last few months, and retail sales too have gone up. I think this is obviously new confidence post-COVID after a long period of people lacking in confidence to get out and about, and we're feeling the benefit of it. And I'm sure those who are coming into the park are also benefiting in terms of health and well-being. So it's win-win all the way around. Only good news.
I was only just going to click on the back of the Section 106 conversation as well to say that the table we put in the report now really shows that brought forward position, and that the level of sort of risk of clawback still remains very low. So even when sort of we had those kind of building up, it was still very low anyway. It never got past about 1.5 years against a 3-year sort of clawback position, and that position's improving. But it's just to kind of reiterate the fact that that has always been quite a low position, and it's improving in terms of risk.
The money paid to Visit York. Now, does that advertise us as well? You know, we seem to have paid a lot of money, but if it's not advertising us, you know, we.
It's an operational question which I might have to take away. But
Yeah.
Bryony does have a hand up, so she may.
Go on, Bryony.
Yeah, so for the last couple of years now, we've had a sort of partnership arrangement with Visit York, so that as part of the promotion of people visiting York, we encourage people to sort of extend their stay and visit the North York Moors at the same time. So it's kind of a bigger marketing package of work. So yeah, we definitely are encouraging people to come and visit us, and particularly around our dark skies.
Yeah.
Festivals, the Fringe, and the sort of the shoulder season, and Christmas time as well. So yeah, it definitely goes on promoting the North York Moors.
Oh, good. Thank you. Any more comments for Pete at the moment? Oh, Gareth, please.
Just if I may, Chair, just a couple points. I think one thing is just to, I guess, the sort of triangulation of assurance. So, you know, the things I've just said around financial sustainability and the reporting and the financial position of the authority, there's a clear linkage, I guess, to Pete's report there in terms of the, I guess, the consistency and the settled nature of the budgetary position. So I think that's a key point to emphasise that, you know, our view is, and the comments in our VFM report, in essence, are in line with the narrative that Pete's just presented. There's no sort of mismatch there, so I think that's a key point for members. And then just coming to Malcolm's point around the Section 106 expenditure, each year that's one of our sort of areas of focus on the audit. So we meet with Brian at least on an annual basis, and with Pete on that very specific point around, is there a risk of repayment around some of this Section 106 money, and if so, you know, is it being properly accounted for? And you might recall maybe 3 or 4 years ago there was a sort of a recommendation around that very point, and you know, certainly from our perspective, you know, there's no significant risk around repayment, but it is just to reassure, I guess, Malcolm and other members, that is something that we do look at each year, and we were satisfied with that there were no issues arising.
Sorry, thank you. Has anyone else got a comment for Pete on this? No. Is there a note to take on that?
There's no contents in the report.
Right. Members just need to note the contents of the report. That's okay. Thank you. We move on to item 8, the medium-term financial strategy. That'll be you again, is it, Pete? Thank you.
It is indeed. There is a presentation for this one. And hopefully this will work. Okay, yeah, so this is it's just sort of a reminder for members that we bring the medium-term financial strategy to this meeting every year in November FRASC, and then we bring it to December MPA following that. So this is an opportunity for FRASC members to comment ahead of it going to MPA, where it'll be sort of more formally approved. Just a little bit of background for members. A lot of this you'll be familiar with anyway, but just what is the medium-term financial strategy? It's a document, annual document that looks at 5 years worth of financial forecast effectively, and it's not as detailed as the budget would be, but it's just a look with a number of assumptions laid over to make sure from a financial point of view we are aware of any potential issues in the future, any potential deficit issues, so we address them early and in time. And we look at any key risk areas so that really we make sure that as an authority, we're aware of what those risks are within our financial position, our financial numbers, and that we are catering for those risks in the appropriate way. How does it differ to the budget? So the budget process comes in February and March. That tends to be for 1 year only, and it's very detailed. It's where we really crunch the numbers right down for that year to produce that balanced budget. MTFS is much more on broad principles of looking at the numbers and casting a number of assumptions across. So over the next month or two, as we go towards that budget process, we'll be doing an enormous amount of detailed work around pay and all sorts to make sure we have a very comprehensive set of numbers for 24-25. But this document is a much more strategic document. How does it tie into business plans? So every year we refresh the MTFS and the business plan hand in hand. The two go together. So this produces a resourcing position effectively to deliver the business plan. If the resource position is threatened, then maybe we can't deliver everything in the business plan, and we need to look at the two of them side by side in that context. So really, this is a document that reassures us we have the resources to deliver the things that you'll see coming in business plan documentation over the next 2 to 3 months. And just a reminder that the strategy is to grow through maximising delivery from available resources. So as directors, we're keen to continue this strategy of growth, and we all know at the moment that the core grant isn't increasing, but that doesn't mean as an authority we can't continue to strive to grow as an authority, both in resources, but there's a tangible link between the more resources you have, the more outputs you can deliver. So really being able to grow our resources enables us to be able to do more things for the national park. And I think this document, this graph just helps a little bit to kind of illustrate where we've come from, where we're going. Goes right back to sort of 09-10, just prior to austerity. And it just shows that kind of growing position of external funding over that time, that growing position of Section 106 funding over that time, but equally shows how core grant has stagnated. And earned income is just really a small proportion overall of the overall resources that we have as an authority, but that we have continued to grow. But you can see there, and we'll come across this short in the next slides, in those last 5 years in the current MTFS, really that sort of maximum resource level is stagnating there. And that's what this MTFS is saying at the moment in terms of casting those numbers forward. But it also covers a number of strategies to try to grow those numbers and continue to grow those numbers and continue that trend that we see up to 23-24 of continued growth. And then the black line is just worth noting that if DEFRA grant had had RPI applied throughout, that's the level that we'd have had as core grant, which obviously you can see that versus the purple section. It's considerably different, but it also illustrates how actually we have diversified and brought more income in to help offset a lot of that core grant loss. And it's a strategy that we can see there in graph form, and one that this MTFS sort of proposes we continue with similar strategy to it was deployed so far. So a few notes on the financial position. So increasing deficits from 26-27. Actually, you heard Gareth refer to that actually in terms of last year's MTFS, and it's still the same now. Last year we reported we have a year or two of breathing space before we then see those deficits starting to kick in. That remains the same, but obviously now it's just next year. In 26-27, we still continue to see that deficit position, and then that grows each time. And one note, you'll remember 2 years ago, we made some assumptions in the MTFS around inflation in particular, which ended up being dwarfed by what we actually saw in pay and overhead inflation numbers. Last year, the assumptions built into budget were appropriate assumptions. We had a pay award that I think was 1% higher than we had in the MTFS, which is an impact of about 30-40k, which we dealt with in the budget setting report in February, March. But broadly, the assumptions we built in were okay, and therefore there's no kind of extra assumptions we have to make to cater for that this year. The only exception to that is utilities. So we've signed into a new utilities deal for gas and electricity, and that's proven to be higher than we anticipated. That's going to cost us about an extra £150,000 a year. But we've catered for that in terms of being able to offset that in this MTFS paper, so we still have a balanced position next year. Deficit from utilities offset by growth in car park income. So we have some growth in our car park income next year from a number of initiatives being undertaken by our commercial manager. We have education transition. So that transition we've talked about the education service, that's now been built in, and a small amount of funding diversification. So they've helped offset that utilities increase, but otherwise the numbers remain broadly the same year on year. The authorities continue to grow resources and thereby expenditure. So the two come hand in hand. The more resources, the more expenditure we spend. But the MTFS indicates that stalls unless we make some strategic changes. And then finally, reserves are all ring-fenced or earmarked. Funding deficits through reserves isn't a sustainable option. We do have a decent amount of reserves, but they all are ring-fenced to either projects or previously approved elements, or the ring-fence to Section 106. So long-term sustainability of funding them from reserves is not a sustainable option. We need to make sure that everything is funded. And there's no generic savings or income generation targets in this MTFS. So actually, we haven't got anything like, do you know what, income generation, we're going to get X amount more. That's not really attached to anything. Everything that's in the MTFS and built in is attached to something. There's no just generic target. So actually, we see that sort of 5 years of stagnating. Actually, we've got quite a lot of ambitions around earned income and things, but they're not built in until things come forward that have got a bit more concrete behind them. And that just helps illustrate the MTFS position a bit more clearly than putting in sort of generic targets. So a number of the risks and key financial assumptions. So overhead inflation, certainly in the last couple of years, that's been our biggest risk, running at a very high level. We have seen that start to reduce now to about the 6-7% mark. And we're starting to see that settle from certainly the 12, 13, 14% we were seeing at one point. Next year, we've got 4% built in, and then 2% thereafter, going back to sort of the government target of 2%. There's an element of risk in there. It's 6-7% at the moment, but forecasts do tend to suggest that's going to settle. But as we know at the moment, there's so much going on in the world from a macroeconomic level that there's a high risk of things that can set inflation back off again. So it's something we absolutely need to be aware of and aware of as a risk. And it's worth saying for every 1% of overhead inflation we get, it's an extra £15,000 for the authority to find. Pay inflation, which is certainly our biggest number. So that one is the one that's most influenced by any change. From a sensitivity analysis point of view, the percentage we have built in. And we have a little bit more cautious around pay inflation, matching inflation at 4% next year, but then coming down that little bit more slowly at 3 and 2 over the following 2 years. And both of these assumptions are in line with last year's MTFS. So that's what we had for those following years in the MTFS. They haven't changed from that assumption from last year. And again, from a pay inflation point of view, it's about £40,000 for every 1% increase over and above the assumptions we have built in. I'm eternally optimistic we'll have a view on what that pay award may be by budget time, but we'll see. That may just be an offer on the table. I suspect the actual final thing will come much later than that, as it has this year, but at least that might provide us with an indication. DEFRA funding, you'll be used to this line, frozen throughout is the assumption at the moment. It has been for 5 years, and we continue what is an appropriate and cautious approach to say that that will still be flat cash settlements for the next 5 years in this MTFS period. Earned income is currently 1.8 million. We've got a slide on that later, so I'll come across that. But earned income in the paper is always deemed as a risk just because of the nature of it. We saw in COVID with the closure of car parks that it has a significant impact. We've seen with planning this year, that planning volumes going down. So there is always that risk element with earned income in any case. And external funding, we have a £2.5 million target built in throughout that MTFS period. That's, as you remember, as part of the business plan, we said that we would increase to £2.5 million annual expenditure effectively. So not successful applications adding up to £2.5 million spend in year against external project funding. And we're working well towards that at the moment. We're exceeding it this year. There is something around having a look at some of those KPIs, including that £2.5 million, but I'll be coming across later in terms of that growth of external funding and some of the challenges around that. Interest, this is kind of at the moment for us, the flip side of inflation. Inflation means higher interest rates. That to us benefits at the moment because of the cash and we have no borrowings. But this is a double-sided thing. One, that yes, right now it benefits us, but again, if interest rates come down in the future, we can't rely on delivery from interest. It's something at the moment that is delivering well for us, but we can't build the next 5 years on an assumption of high interest. It's too unpredictable to kind of build those assumptions. So a cautious approach is taken in the MTFS to that. And the flip side at the moment, there's no borrowings and the MTFS doesn't have any borrowings, but we know potentially in the future we may borrow money, and then that the flip side of that is interest rates are higher. So public work loan board loans would cost us more right now. And that brings us on to property. We've got a property project at the moment. There's no assumptions built in for that at the moment, bar the sale of Beaconsfield, which now has gone through, so the savings of not having that property. Other than that, at the moment, until there's more conclusions from that project, there's nothing built into this MTFS. I guess the thing to flag is if there was any borrowings required from that project in the future, that's something we'd need to find from revenue budgets. Large capital projects, I always leave this one in the report. The more external funding we do, the more big project delivery we do, the more inherent risk there is. So as an authority, we have to have constant consideration of things like contingencies built into projects. And sort of working very well with funders in terms of whether we ever need to re-engineer projects, etc. But that awareness that there is that capital risk now, that if potentially we may be, you know, if there's overspends, risk of overspends, we may need to foot those potentially within grant agreements. So it's something we just need to be aware of, and it's one of the things that is kind of pushed me to look at increasing that sort of risk reserves we have in the balance sheet. And then core resource squeeze. So we'll come across this. This is kind of all of those core resources that help to deliver all of these things. So all of your corporate and core functions, the core elements of your conservation and climate change and recreation and wellbeing teams all need to help deliver this growth. And there's a real squeeze on those areas, and it's how we fund that. So some headline figures. So we've got the 5 years there. 23, 24 is this year, and then the following 5 years. So you can see there, 23, 24, 24, 25, we've got a balanced position. That gives us a little bit of breathing space, and that's still delivering everything that we've said we'll deliver in the business plan. There's been no changes to that. 25, 26 onwards, we start to see that gap increasing. 200k coming in 25, 26, and that gap effectively each year then after is round about the 130 mark, which is effectively the difference between 2% inflation and core grant freeze. So effectively that pressure on core grants is the reason we have that ever expanding gap. And this is just quite useful just to kind of where the resources come from. It is very resource focused, the MTFS, in terms of what's helping to fund the overall position and delivery. And 35% now is our core grant, 31% section 106, 20% external and 40% earned. And that's kind of how our overall 12.7 million MTFS position for next year is built up. So growth strategy. So we talked earlier about the fact that the directors want to try and grow to manage deficits. So we've got a couple of areas actually which are now becoming more business as usual. So the first one is savings and efficiencies. This is built in now into sort of what should be standard practice throughout. So if you can find ways of doing things more efficiently, savings that naturally drop out, we should absolutely be looking through for those. And we do that as part of the budget process. We do that as part of Q2, actually, as we go through year as well, in-year savings, as well as sort of those longer term, more sustainable savings. There's less ability now to make savings and efficiencies naturally. The opportunities are much, much fewer after sort of 12, 13 years, really, of streamlining a lot of operations. But we should never stop looking for ways of doing things better and in a more streamlined way. And then maximising existing resources. We've talked a lot about this in terms of, I'm doing this piece of work, where can I fund this from? And again, that's very much part of the ethos now of the organisation and built in, that if you're doing something, you should be considering not just how do I deliver, but what's going to fund that. And we've done a lot of work with staff to make them aware of that funding position and the need to kind of look at actually all of our resourcing, whether that be externally funded and Section 106 or our core grant, and look at those options about actually how do I fund this work. And then we've got an income growth element. So actually that business as usual is going to help us effectively just be a little bit more efficient. It's going to help us to fund things from different places. It might take things off core grants, but they don't fundamentally grow the resource. So your income doesn't necessarily grow from those top two. You have a more efficient operation and more space, but not necessarily that growth factor. So there's two areas where growth can come from. One is earned income. So growing our earned income, we talked before about things, our car parks, and there's a slide coming up on that, which I'll talk a little bit more detail about. But that's one area where we could actually grow. And the other one is increasing delivery through externally funded projects. So that external funding pipeline, which enables us as an authority to deliver more work on the ground. And that's being more then driven through externally funded projects and that project ethos. And then just to the bottom, if we don't grow, there is another alternative, and that is actually we don't grow resources, and that means we manage decline. So that is your other option, effectively, that actually, if we say, actually, you know what, we're not going to grow those elements, and the grant is going down, then we effectively have to say, well, we reduce what our output is, and we manage a decline. So that is the backstop. But as I've said, directors are keen to look for a growth strategy that enables us to maximise what we can deliver for the national park. So the first two of those, that business as usual, maximising resources, making savings and efficiencies. I think this grant is quite helpful just to see how each department is built up and just recognise that each department is different. So within here, we can see on conservation and climate change, the core grant element, which is the core team that enables the delivery of all of that work, is quite a small element of that. They do a lot of work for externally funded projects, and a lot of the Section 106 is geared towards that as well. I guess what it does highlight is even if you are, as conservation art, delivering almost 100% now through project delivery, you still need a core element that's going to deliver that. You need a core element on the ground that's going to do those applications, the enormous amount of work that goes into doing an application. You will always need a core grant element to be able to leverage that money. Recreation and wellbeing, a little bit more work going on around there in terms of external funding. We've talked a little bit about that around some of those services. And they, in there, they have the big proportion of earned income coming through that area. And then tourism, marketing and comms, as you can see there, Section 106, but each of them will need an element of core grant to be able to deliver. And then you have your corporate services and planning services, which are very dependent on core grant. Corporate services broadly aren't fundable from the other sources of income. So therefore, it's always going to be core grant demanding. And planning services the same. So planning services is funded 40%, 30% or so, I think, from the actual earned income, the sort of the fee sets. So there'll always be an element of core grant needed to deliver those services, statutory services and corporate services. And the more we're moving towards core grant coming down, the more it's actually starting to fund those corporate and statutory services, and there's less to deliver the other. And we need to be quite acute about how we use core grants to maximise delivery. So looking for savings and efficiencies should be standard practice. Looking for alternative income sources becoming standard operating approach. And now some limitations to opportunities, particularly around savings and efficiencies. We should never stop looking, but there's no really big obvious saving opportunities. Increase earned income was the other one that we mentioned, just in terms of the growth. This is a graph that just illustrates 25, 26 and actually where our earned income comes from. And we can see how car parks is such a big part of that in terms of making our assets work. A big chunk is planning, which is largely the statutory fees and then pre-plan fees on top. Little bit of retail and then just some small other areas. And it's worth saying the 10% financial is largely the interest we get off our cash, which is not necessarily a long-term element of this. So maximising our assets, all of this is coming from our assets, from our visitor centres, or it's coming from our car parks. It's the assets we own, which is generating a lot of our earned income. And we absolutely, I hate the word sweating assets. So I've put maximising assets instead. I always think sweating assets sounds grim. But maximising assets, we need to continue that work. And that's what we're doing at the moment to say our assets, can we absolutely make them work to us to the maximum? And that's very much that sort of commercial strategy that we're looking at the moment. New initiatives are the different things we can do. We've done the same things for a long time. So we're also looking actually at the new initiatives we can do that will help to generate earned income. And earned income being margin, more importantly, commercial approach. We can generate income, but if it costs us more money than the income we get, it's obviously not a very good thing to do. So all of those initiatives need testing properly and commercially. Inflating fees, we should always inflate fees. And we should make sure we do that as standard commercial approach within our agreements, that we have inflationary increases in any commercial agreements that we have. And a commercial ethos throughout the organisation, and that's something we're definitely building with our commercial manager in particular, and making sure that in all of our approaches to these things, we act in a reasonable but commercial way, looking at margin, looking at what is the right things for us to do. And then growing external funding, I've nicked Ellen's graph out of her report, so I'm still preserve it. But this just illustrates, I guess, in 23-24, how much we're doing the pipeline that we've got 24-25, illustrates that point about the fact that we're doing more than 2.5 million. And in the pipeline later on, obviously that comes down, but as the pipeline develops over the next 2 years, we are consistently starting to see that we're delivering more than 2.5 million of external funding each year. But that's coming from that project-driven culture that we're looking at. Actually, if we deliver through projects, we can deliver more on the ground. Core built to resource increase project delivery. So I've mentioned that, and this is one of the tightest constraints we have to this growth at the moment, is making sure that our core can do that. We're finding that those same people who are delivering the projects are the same people that are spending many hours on project applications. They really do take an extraordinary amount of time, and team resource from across the board, from IT, from finance, from HR. There's all kinds of elements that go into this kind of, and we need to make sure that all of those are resourced properly to be able to deliver. And I think there's a risk of failure without getting the right approach. So if we just gear towards doing as much projects and external funding as possible and don't get that core to be able to support it, there's that risk of not being able to deliver. And I think that's something that as management, we're very keen to make sure we get that balance right, and that we resource the core properly before we become too aspirational about growing that. It's a strategy that we need to get right, otherwise there is a risk there. And it's the only real option remaining to increase output for the national park and continued growth. The way I look at it is earned income. Even if you brought in a whole new car park in a fantastic location, it's unlikely to make you more than, say, £100,000 worth of margin per year. We've got £130,000 to find in every year in the MTFS. So the reality is it can help to support the core and continue to support the core, but that's probably going to do that more than it's going to help to deliver more on the ground. So I think external funding, project delivery, and really being able to set ourselves up to deliver and expand that sort of external funding project and partnerships, I think is the real way to growth. So as a conclusion, indicates a deficit of 0.2 million in 26-27, and then each year increasing based on the assumptions built in. Driving factor, the freezing core grant versus cost inflation. That's the main reason for those deficits. The way to continue to deliver growth and maximise outcomes for the national park is to grow overall resources and build partnerships. So that just reiterates that point around how we deliver. And project delivery increases outcomes and maximises leverage from core resources. Core resources must be sufficient to be able to deliver the project. So again, it's being that drum about, if this is, we feel as directors is the right approach, but we have to get it right, and we have to make sure that the core is resourced enough to be able to deliver it, to make sure it's successful. Earned income growth will help to support the core, but prioritisation of the use of those core resources is essential, looking at what's funded from the DEFRA core grant and how we deploy it. And not growing resources will mean that we have to manage decline. So that's kind of the reality, really. If we don't grow those two areas in particular, then there will be some degree of managed decline over that period of time. And that's, I guess, the default option to grow. And then next steps, final MTFS report will go to NPA in December, building in any feedback or any comments from this meeting. Detailed 23-24 budget proposals with all the big number crunching will come to FRASC in February for comment ahead of final sign-off in March. And the recommendation is to note the content of the report and comment ahead of it going to December NPA, and any amendments you may want us to build in.
Well, thanks, Pete. That was a very detailed and brilliant, absolutely financial strategy, which I'm sure it puts everybody in the picture. Go on, George. We'll have but it is a brilliant report, so thanks, Pete. George.
Yes, thank you very much for the report. And the presentation, very helpful, and also the online report. And I think, as you absolutely said, we need to increase and grow resources. Otherwise, the alternative is something that I don't believe anyone here in this room would want to be in that position. I have a question about 5.3.2, which is the utility expenses that you discussed also through the presentation, and the 140 or 150k additional cost. Can I just understand a little bit more? Because the way this is worded in the paper is that the increase was as a result of changing the agreement, or was it because it happened at the same time when energy prices increased, or because we had some?
Yeah, so the increase, we were in a fixed deal for quite a period of time, which saw us fend off some of the increases when it was going up considerably. So when we signed up this new agreement, it was always going to be a big jump because we've been protected for a little period of time. And in the NTFS, we underestimated the size of that jump when it came round to actually signing up the new agreement. So it's 140k above what we had assumed previously would be that uplift.
So the previous agreement had a cap built into it in some form, and therefore that expired. So in a way, we were paying less than what the current market rate at the time. And therefore, when that came to an end, obviously no one was going to renew at the same level of what we had before because it was too good for that time. So we were very fortunate with fixing that level a few years earlier. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes
that's
sense.
right, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any more comments? Malcolm, then John.
Yeah, I mean, really good report there, Pete. And it just emphasises, doesn't it, the sort of challenges that we face with the deficits and things, and the limit of the core grant. I've got two kind of queries. One is, where's the sort of stability level that we may be aiming at? I don't mean in precise terms, but it just seems to me that clearly the strategy is right. The only place that we can grow is from external. Given that you've got a core, you've made the point that that core is a limiting factor. I know you can't really put a number on that, but at the moment, the indications are that we're going to continue to grow for the next 5 years. Previously, you sort of said an option is decline. I mean, the other option is some sort of stability. Is that a way to look at it? I mean,
I think
the other point I'm kind of thinking through it is, you're clearly indicating as we get more income from external sources, then the way we manage it, the organisation of the department, the authority, will be changing to some extent, and that's something we'll need to look at subsequently. So I'm just trying to get a feel for where's this stability level.
Yeah.
I mean, there's not going to be a huge increase in core grants in the next 5 years or maybe ever, I think. So we're going from the situation that we were in 10, 15 years ago to a totally new situation.
Yeah. I think
can you just help me out a bit there?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think at the moment the MTFS assumes a basically flat line at the moment because we haven't built in these extra income, the growth strategy. There is naturally going to be a limit to how much you can grow, particularly with core grant being constrained, because there's always going to be a series of costs you can't fund from anywhere. And that core has to support the ability to deliver external funding. So there will be a limit to how much you can grow, but what we should be looking to do is maximise the amount that we can grow to. So if we can, I guess, change our core to enable us to deliver X amount more, then we ought to be doing that and looking all the time about how we do that. But there is probably a natural limit to what we can deliver from a 4.4 million grant. If in a wonderful world, definitely increased our grants, that would obviously enable us to be able to deliver and much more sustainable in that way. Because we will always need that core grants. But as you said, that seems unlikely at the moment, and the MTFS makes that cautious assumption. I think in terms of stability, if we said, actually, do you know what, we're not going to grow, we're just going to try and remain stable, then we would need to at least grow by the amount that we're losing core grants in order to remain stable. If we don't grow core grants per this assumption, and like I said, if that changed, great. But in the assumption it's built into the MTFS, we would have to manage decline unless we can grow the income side. I guess stability would be growing earned income by the same amount as core grant goes down. Yeah. I guess that would be stability. But even then, there are certain things in core grants that can't be funded from elsewhere. So even then, staying stable is difficult without growing in the way that I think this strategy sort of indicates. But agree with you, there is a natural limit to the amount that we can probably leverage from core resources. Yeah. But I don't think we're there yet. I think we've got a strategy here that will enable us to grow, but we've got to be set up in the right way to do it.
Which is good news.
It is. I mean, it's a good news. It's an optimistic strategy, which is a good thing. And I think we've got an optimistic board of directors who look at things in a positive way to say, actually, do you know what, let's look at how we can grow out of this and deliver the most we can for the national park, which is what the aims should always be. So it is positive, but it's also laced with you know, with caution as well. You know, it's a cautious MTFS. It has some cautious assumptions in there. We've seen what's happened with inflation and pay inflation and how that can impact as well. So there is still an enormous amount of risks around this picture. But how we manage that as directors of board, as members, is key to being able to continue to deliver the most we can. I don't know if Tom wants to add anything in sort of around strategy at this point, but
yeah, I mean, a couple of points. I mean, we embarked on a journey a couple of years ago as an organisation of seeking to grow through becoming a more project-based organisation, and I think Pete set out the context and the stakes really well. We're really optimistic and confident that we can do that. And also, I think it's a strategy that carries the workforce of the organisation as well. I feel in a relative, I've said it before amongst this group, I feel in a relatively fortunate position as a National Park Authority Chief Executive that we're not managing decline. And that's in part thanks to the fact that we've been able to take our step with us on a journey towards becoming a more project-based organisation. But Malcolm, as you pointed out, there will be limits to that at some point in future. Plus, it will also mean some down the line, some retooling, further retooling of the organisation, how we work, in order to bolster some of those kind of core corporate services that enable us to go through becoming more project based. But that's not a conversation for today. The one thing I would want to do though is I wouldn't want anybody to get the assumption that we're fatalistic about core funding from government. We say, as Pete says in the MTFS document, that we're ambitious yet prudent. We're ambitious because we think we can and should grow the organisation, not for the sake of the sort of self-serving reasons of just doing a bit more, but because we think we can actually deliver more and better outcomes in terms of the national park and the national park management plan. And we're certainly proving through the track record of external funding that we're bringing in, and Ellen will pick up on some of the recent project wins in the next item. We think we can continue to do that as long as we can bolster some of those core areas. But we're prudent because the outlook at the moment is that we're unlikely to get a new national park grant settlement until the next spending review round. That's at least 2025, if not 2026, depending on the cycle of the next general election, which is surely going to be within the next 12 months. And then we know that whoever forms the next government, they're likely to face a very constrained fiscal climate in which DEFRA, as a department that's unprotected, is unlikely to see inflation busting departmental expenditure limit settlements over the course of the further 3 years. So it's prudent from our point of view and a management point of view to plan on the basis of some stability, which in real terms means a declining core grant. We're working very closely through National Parks England with the department as it starts to prepare its case for the next CSR. We know we have to be really positive about the case that national parks can make in terms of delivering for the nation, which we can and do already. It's just, and so I won't want anybody to be fatalistic about the prospects of not seeing additional funding from government. But it's right and prudent, I think, for planning purposes to work on the basis that the sort of the median case scenario is stand on in terms of that core funding.
John, did you want to come in?
As Chairman, all the points that I was going to raise have been covered by Pete and indeed Tom, but I do think that this is a report we can take to the National Park Authority in full confidence. It sets out a very clear picture of the way ahead and also outlines the challenges ahead of us as well. So it's a good report. Thank you very much, Rob.
Yeah, apologies for leaving the room. I just found there's been a theft at the house, so sorry I had to go. Because anyway, we'll leave that there. No, I was just going to say I almost put it's a crystal ball, Pete. We could all do with one of those, particularly where we are. As we make the point, we've had major problems on inflation. I'm hopeful this week it's going to looking like it's come down to 3.8 and whatever. So, and that'll affect one way or the other. And also the price of oil's come down. I think we'll all be able to notice that hopefully, and it might eventually get through to us all. So it's one or the other. We either get the interest on the interest rate or we get the inflation. But I think I prefer the inflation rate coming down. Now, I think it's a very good report, and go back to what John said. And, you know, I think we're in a strong position, and it's probably not for this room, but I think if we probably look across all the national parks throughout the country, I think we perform extremely well, and we should be really thank our officers and we're proactive and not reactive, and that's why we're in this position. Yes, thank you very much, and I really recommend the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you need to come back on that?
I was just going to emphasize and reiterate the point that Tom mentioned about us not being overly pessimistic, because of course there has been a major recent development when it came to the Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, and that will bring with it additional opportunities, responsibilities as well. So there are some interesting and exciting things to come, and I'm very hopeful about that.
Any more comments?
Come on, Bob.
Thanks, Chair.
Single brain cells. I'd like to ask a question which has possibly already been answered in all you've had to say. How big an impact on the National Park finances would a default on the 106 money have if it went, you know, if it went into default?
So on section 106 money, presumably mean that for some reason the agreement discontinued.
Yeah.
So we have two agreements in place. One is the Woodsmith agreement, where we have security effectively for 10 years ahead put to one side. Effectively, we have an agreement where 10 years worth of money, and we don't put any money further than 10 years ahead. So effectively, that's put to one side. If it went under, we would have 10 years of secured money to deliver the projects for 10 years ahead, and we don't go beyond that, so that there would be no issue there. And reinstatement of the mine as well, there's also an agreement that money each year is set aside. So if for any reason it discontinued, there'd be the ability to reinstate the site on the ground as well. On Bulby, I believe a little bit less now, but there's still security, and we don't commit any funds beyond, again, that 1 year period of guaranteed monies. So as an authority, we are just responsible with it to make sure that we don't commit beyond where the security is. So it would mean we could deliver less. So we would have to have a look at what we're delivering and how. But none of that money would be committed, so we wouldn't be in a position where suddenly we would have to fund £1 million because we've committed beyond what is secure. So it gives us a secure position, but by all means we would have to strategically look at how we deploy if that resource was suddenly not available to us anymore.
Thanks very much for that, Pete. Thank you.
Just to follow on from that, if I may, Chair, I mean, that was pretty much one of the first questions we asked 5 years ago to Bryony and to Pete. You know, what happens if, because without going into too much detail, at the time there were some question marks over the particular organisation in place for the Section 106 agreement, and we did get a lot of audit assurance and evidence to basically support what Pete's just said. So I would assume that our successors as external auditors, that's probably one of the key areas that they look at upon their appointment around that Section 106 agreement, because it is proportionately, you know, such a big area of the parks MTFS. So we pretty much asked the same question, Bob, and it's something that we've updated each year subsequently with Pete and Bryony.
Thank you.
I ought to say there's no indication of any risk of that, but it's just a prudent approach on our behalf. The other thing that I promised Paul I'd mention, which I haven't so far, is just KPIs, just in the reports. There's a section on KPIs, which are the KPIs that underpin currently our financial strategy, and a comment to say that those need to be reviewed in light of these proposed changes and whether or not they still remain appropriate levels. So that's a piece of work as directors that we need to do, and that's kind of highlighted by one of the KPIs in Paul's report later, which at the moment we're not succeeding, but we need to see whether or not that's actually a relevant KPI or not, given our new strategy.
Could I just ask one? There was a problem with the excess from pension schemes, but there wasn't a problem with the excess from earned income through interest rates. What's the difference? Because really the excess in pensions is interest on sums invested one way or another.
The two aren't really interlinked as such. So in the past, certainly in the MTFS reports, we've had the pension highlighted as a major risk. That's in part because the liabilities we were seeing and the economic climate that we were seeing made it look like it was a major threat. There's two elements to the pensions. One is the liabilities, the payments out. The other is the assets, which is the investment side. And certainly 3 years ago, we thought there was a very high risk of that investment side struggling in the current environment, potentially that gap growing bigger, which would mean then our pension rates increase, which is then a big hit on the revenue budget. So we had it included in our MTFS previously. As it was, the last triennial valuation was very positive. We had a very good assets return actually that defied kind of the market generally. And that's kind of helped to make that go away. It's not something we've taken our eye off. There's another triennial valuation coming up in a year or two's time. So it still presents a risk, but the risk at the moment is deemed to be low because of the performance of the pension scheme. But it's absolutely something that year to year we should continue to have an eye on. As Jeremy Woodshaw has said before, it's certainly something that he wanted to keep an eye on. It's still a risk, but it's a low risk, hence it's not in the report this time, but it's absolutely something that every year we consider as part of the MTFS as to whether it should be included.
Right, thank you. Any more comments for Pete? Well, thank you very much, and it's a good report to take to NPA, as John said, and we're pleased to have such a good report to go forward. And the recommendation that members comment and report ahead of the authority in December, the full authority in December, and ahead of the detailed budget setting for 24-25 in February. Everybody happy? Thanking you. If we move on to external funding, and we have Ellen to give us a report on the external funding, and over to you.
Good morning, everyone. So just wanted to give a summary of the report that was provided. We have seen some great success. So we have met the target for last financial year, and we've exceeded the target for this financial year. As you'll see from the report, that's mainly to do with all of the income for the Riveresque projects and partnership working with the Trust on Birds on the Edge. As Pete kindly shared the graph earlier, you can see that we've got a projection which is quite favourable for next year. And then our sort of work is being concentrated on bringing in external funding for 2025-26 and onwards. So then we can fill that gap. So we have sort of worked quite solidly over the last 4 months on some really big pieces of work, and I've given you a snapshot of funding proposals that we've submitted since the last CRASC meeting. A big application went into the Landscape Recovery Fund that DEFRA hold for the round 2, and that was all to do with Levisham's work. So very exciting sort of partnership with Forestry England. So we worked together really well with them to submit the application, which turned into quite a mammoth task, but it should, if it comes off, it should be a lovely project to realise the ambitions of Levisham. The other application which I summarised is the Raiding the Bank application. So we've had funding previously from the Landscape Enhancement Initiative, which is the National Grid's pot of funding that we can bid to every year. So we've gone back to them again for a different project, which will look at archaeological works around Sutton Bank, also engaging with the community, so bringing them in to look at what all of the historical remains around the area, and also looking at putting on a trail for people and some wildlife and habitat improvements. We've also put in there, after discussions with the funder about access for the project, the Changing Places toilet for Sutton Bank Visitor Centre as a bit of a extra add-on to the project. So hopefully if that comes off, that would be a really good added value for Sutton Bank. And then moving on to the successes since the last FRASC, we have been successful with the mortar restore sort of second phase of that project. So previously we were doing the discovery work around what peatland areas we should be working on, but we've actually now received the funding for the restoration of those peatland areas. So that's really exciting pot of money that we will have over the next couple of years to see that work through. And then for future activity, we're looking at a really sort of broad range of different projects. So we're working with Mark, who is the new project manager now, making sure that all the staff understand how to realise the ambitions of their ideas, so making them more formalised and hopefully having a really structured process for that. So all of the staff understand how we can take it from an idea right through to funding. And the ideas that are being sort of developed at the moment are around the health and wellbeing strategy that Heather worked on. So trying to realise everything that she's trying to aim for through that, such as green social prescribing activities. We're working with the Trust on a pilot for that idea at the moment. So hopefully that will come off to be more of a bigger project in future years. We're looking at funding for the apprentice team, and then also funding to bring in possibly Arts Council funding for the arts and culture strategy that Sally has worked on. And she's working hard at the moment to formulate the partnership for that. And then there's all the work around Bransdale and additional shallow peat work that is needed for those areas that were not eligible under the current application that we were successful with. And then we're looking at a partnership for the observatory as well, so possibly approaching a lottery for the new build for the observatory at Danby to increase the offer of things that are available at that visitor centre. And then at the last FRASC, you asked me just to consider the full cost recovery implications for all of the applications. So I've given just some detail about how that works when we're developing funding applications. So it's really dependent on which funder we do approach. Most costs are eligible with funders, but things like electricity and Tom's salary and things like that that can't be considered in applications has to be covered obviously by core or other avenues, as Pete has described, and obviously my time as well, because that would be seen as a retrospective cost that could be covered. So we work hard to make sure that we can eke out as much funding as we can from each of the funders that we apply to make it a sustainable project going forward. And we often are able to apply for finance time or IT costs, marketing and comms, which is useful to support core or section 106. So in the table, I've identified the first one. The table 2 is the applications that we have submitted over the last few months and which are awaiting a decision. The new column that I've put in as a request from the last FRASC was to put in how much of the grant will contribute to the total project costs. So you can see a bit of a better idea of how much the grant will cover. So often match funding comes from section 106 or match kind in time, which is useful to leverage in this funding. So we've awaiting an application outcome for the River-esque Restore project from the Net Zero Fund. So we should hear in January now whether that should be a positive application. And linking Levisham, as I've mentioned before, was nearly £650,000 application. And then a really, really lovely project that Elspeth put together was our Grubs Up project. And that's to Natural England's Species Survival Fund that's being distributed by the Heritage Lottery Fund. And that's for 650,000. And it's all about connecting habitats across the national park and then down into the AONB. So we did a partnership with them, and we will hear the outcome of that in February. And raising the bank, as we've mentioned earlier, we should hear about that in the next couple of months, but it's unclear on their timescales for assessment. And then a really big application went into the National Lottery Community Fund last week. It ended up being actually over £1 million. It says here 954, as that was what we originally put into the expression of interest, but we put in the full application after we were invited through last week, and the full cost came out at 1 million. And that should be some really exciting work. It's basically Revitalise, but in the River-esque catchment area. And that's working with Yorkshire Wildlife Trust, Yorkshire Marine Nature Partnership and Groundwork to deliver a 5-year project to engage people with the Esk catchment. Then we have the Shared Prosperity Fund. It's looking quite positive for this one. So that is for all of the offer on at Danby and at Sutton Bank. So then we can improve the play area and do some art trails, and it will be to employ a new tramper officer as well to find some new routes. So they are those, and then we're just waiting on some net zero ones as well. So there's the Lastingham work as well. We're just waiting, and we won't hear about that until January. And the other net zero applications we were involved in as just partners, we won't actually see a flow of money through us, but it's nice to be partners on those bids. And then we were unsuccessful. It was not really unsuccessful because it was just an idea that we gave to the Heritage Fund. They want us to go back and have a little tweak of it and make it into more of a project. So we're going to revise that project approach to them. And then those that have recently been funded, as mentioned before, is the More to Restore project, so 1.2 million to achieve the peat restoration over the next 2 years. And then we've had the funding from the Species Recovery Capital Grant, which I think we talked about last time, which was just shy of £500,000. And then all of the other ones we mentioned at previous meetings. And that is it. So it's just to approve the report and any questions.
Thank you, Alan.
Okay.
A lot of hard work goes into your work, and as Pete said earlier, you know, it was there's a hell of a lot of unseen work goes into the projects to put them forward. So thank you very much. Questions, John, please.
Thank you, Alan. This is great, isn't it? Because this is full of exciting, ambitious projects. It really is. Do we get to? I mean, we're due to hear on the end of November about the Levisham bid.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have is there a network of insiders? Who are we up against? There must be some sort of analysis afterwards when you look at other national parks and say, well, why did theirs work and ours did? And presumably we're going to get an update, if not on the 29th, the next day. I'm not sure what day the 29th is, but I don't think we can wait until National Park Authority on the 11th of December. It would be good to know as soon as we possibly can. But it just shows, doesn't it, the scale of our ambition, and helps to explain why we can be optimistic about dragging in that. Well, you look at it and you think, well, why wouldn't they fund that? But of course, we're up against there's one or two other national parks that might shut their hat into the ring as well. But it's fantastic to read. Thanks ever so much.
Yeah, thank you. So it's interesting with the Levisham money. We are, we're always optimistic, and we wouldn't apply for the funding if we were not optimistic, because it is such an undertaking for everybody involved. With that grant round, they do want a geographical spread across the country, across England, for the money to be distributed. And at the moment, there isn't anything in our area that was previously funded. So that, is favourable. However, not guaranteed.
No.
But yeah, we are optimistic, but we have no idea about the competition. You do, like Forestry England, obviously know about the other forestry applications that were submitted across the country. So, and we did actually work together. So we supported each other with, oh, how did you answer that question? Or how did we answer that question? And it was sort of mutual sort of peer support, which was really nice. But yes, we don't know. And with other applications like the Grubs Up project, you can see how many people are on the initial webinar and how it then diminishes as future webinars come and people pull out. So that's quite positive. But otherwise it's a secret code, isn't it, among the funders? So yeah.
There's everything else across.
Absolutely.
Patrick?
Thank you, Joe. Just completely endorse what John's just said. It's an excellent report and it is exciting. My question is for Pete as well, for both of you. Probably, apologies, Chair, slightly relates to the previous item, but your target you've been set is to try and secure £2.5 million of external funding per annum.
It's incremental up to the end of the business plan.
Up to £2.5 million.
Yes, so 2.2, 2.5, yeah.
But in the budget, Pete, you've just set out, you were assuming £2.5 million. Is that right, in your midterm financial strategy? Just my question is, the deficit you were showing in years 3, 4, 5, so was that on the assumption that £2.5 million would be hit, or are you budgeting a lower number?
Yes, so it assumes 2.5 is hit by 26, 27, and they're on forward at 2.5 million, but also assumes 2.5 million of expenditure as well, so both income and expenditure. So it only really affects the overall resource level of delivery. So the growth strategy, and then is your target is ultimately 2.5 million, but thereafter no more than that. So the NTFS has 2.5 million built in. That's the current target that we built into the business plan. But if we're going to grow, we probably want to look at growing that 2.5. We are already doing more than that this year. We've got a pipeline higher than that next year. That doesn't mean we're going to secure it next year. It's a pipeline at this point in time. Fine. But doing more than 2.5 million, because that does include farming and protected landscapes as well. It's worth mentioning. Yeah. To secure more than 2.5 million puts a big demand on the core, puts a big demand on Ellen's team, puts a big demand on that core conservation, recreation and wellbeing team that needs to do all the application work as well. It's a big team effort. So we need to, if we're going to grow that, and at the moment the NTFS has 5 years where it's fairly stagnant, but we're looking to make that go up by growing external funding. We need to make sure that core can support it. Thank you, because it looks as if, and not far off £4 million. That would be incredible. I mean, you must, according to this graph, you're very, very close. Do you think we'll make 4 million by that's the end of March?
Yes, it's hard to know, isn't it? Yeah, it would be. It would be amazing, and
money.
So that's. Yeah, so that's
considered. Pointing out it's the amount of expenditure in the year against external funding rather than the amount secured in year. But the graph does represent that though.
Yeah, it's taking into consideration where the spend would be over the term of the grant. So
it's fantastic work. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Tom? Yeah, a couple of things. I think just on that, Pete's right to point out that we include farming and protected landscapes as part of our external funding type, because it's not core grant funding. That programme comes to an end at the end of 2025, unless it's continued in some shape or form. Clearly, the track record of delivery across the protected landscapes pretty good. We had a really encouraging letter from Mark Spencer, the Agriculture Minister, last week about the success of FIPL. We're keen to look at how protected landscapes can play a broader role in the delivery of environmental land management going forward. But I think it's prudent to bear in mind that as things stand, that's likely to come to an end. That said, absolutely right. I mean, the work that Ellen and the wider team across the organisation are doing to secure external funding is brilliant. And I mean, it always heartens me when I kind of walk along the corridors and see Ellen side by side with colleagues in different teams in the organisation workshopping how we put these bids together, because that's exactly the kind of way we need to work as an organisation. It's really, really encouraging to see. I did just want to make a point about the landscape recovery proposal. I mean, I will be absolutely gutted if that one doesn't succeed. It's absolutely in the slot in terms of what DEFRA and Natural England are looking for, and the partnership that we've been able to build working collaboratively with Forestry England and North Yorkshire Moors Railway, the Wildlife Trust, and the local farmers, commoners and tenants in putting that together is phenomenal. And the scale of the project is really ambitious as well. It's absolutely in terms of what we're looking for, but there's no guarantees on all of that. Strategically, it's really important as well, because this is the third tier of elms. It's ultimately designed for those kind of broader landscape scale changes that are about delivering bolder and better for nature, climate, people and place. So these are absolutely the areas where protected landscapes and national parks in particular need to be operating. So I'm really keen that we do land one in the North York Moors.
Malcolm?
Yeah, just another point. I mean, Tom mentioned FIPL then. I mean, FIPL is slightly different to all the other externally funded schemes, isn't it? Because it's a decision by DEFRA, and it's money from DEFRA that's coming in, whereas all the rest are grant applications and all that sort of thing. It just occurred to me it may be a good idea just to separate that out from all the rest of the stuff on the graphs, just to, part for a number of reasons. One, because it's fairly hefty chunk of money. But also the decision about its future is entirely in the hands of the government. So
yeah, I mean, I think
I mean, we're very hopeful that they may continue, but we don't know about that.
I think it is slightly distinct. I think when we do the MTFS and the resources and things like that, we tend to have separate core grant, which is very much the core grant agreement.
Yeah.
And then anything else outside of that would go into external funding. But yes, there is a distinction there. It's finite in terms of its, but I guess our projects are finite as well in a sense. It is a project of 4 years duration, but and so are the other projects. I guess you could look at it either way, but there is a distinction about in protected landscapes. Yeah.
Any more comments, questions? No. Well, thank you very much, Alan. And if you could pass on our thanks to all your colleagues and those you trap in the corridors or whatever, to get some work out of them, thank them all very kindly. Thank you for all your hard work as well.
Thank you.
The recommendation, ladies, gentlemen, approve the contents of the report and agree the current work being done to secure external funding. All in favour? Thank you. Moving on to item 10, the health and safety report.
Yeah, I'm picking this up. Unfortunately, Ian's not able to be with us today, just in the same way that I accidentally booked annual leave for the last FRASC. Ian's also done the same today. So as he stood in for me at the last FRASC, I'm standing in for Ian, at least in terms of this item. So I think members can take most of the report as read, but there were 3 things that I thought were worth pulling out from that. The first is under 3.3, Ian's referred to the fact that the CIPD produced a report on health and wellbeing at work. It's a really good report. We're due to consider it at our SLT meeting in the coming weeks. But it highlights a rate of absence in the public sector of 10.6 days per full-time equivalent, or 5.8 days in the private sector, which might be a more accurate comparator to the kind of organisation that we are. Whereas our total absence in the current financial year is likely to be about 2.5 days. So it indicates that, at least on that indicator, we're doing something right in terms of absence at work. But there are some other things in that report that we'll certainly be taking a look at, particularly that sense about how people feel in the wider workforce, feel under pressure to work even when they're on annual leave. I know it's something that I've experienced in the past in previous walks of life, and it's not something that we're keen to encourage in this organisation. So it's really important, particularly as we move into that. We're in a much more dynamic working environment, people splitting homework and office work. Sometimes people do feel under pressure to join meetings when they're away, especially with Teams, Zoom, and so on. Under 5.1, following advice from our external health and safety advisor, we buy an external health and safety advice from North Yorkshire Council. We've been taking a look at the way that we store chemicals in our range of depots. We're aware that there've been some spot inspections in the area from HSE, but it's prudent that we do that, and we make sure that we're in good order in terms of storage chemicals. And then finally, under item 6, there's an update on how we're going about delivering the agreed health and safety action plan. I think the one thing I'd just draw members' attention to is the activities that we've been doing as part of Mental Health Awareness Week, where we're doing our utmost to try and encourage staff to find information that they may need to support them in mental health. I mean, it's become much more to the fore about the importance of mental health. I mean, in all walks of life, but particularly in the workplace. And we recognise that we have a responsibility and duty of care to our staff, not just in terms of physical health and well-being, but also importantly mental health and well-being as well. And so we do put quite an emphasis and accent on that in the way that we do with health and safety.
Thank you, Tom. Any comments? I'll take it as read. We're pretty much straightforward. Go on. Sorry.
Yes, sorry. It's a very good report, and obviously, I mean, I use the word again, proactive rather than reactive, and I make no apologies for that. I think, particularly in regard to the Mental Health Awareness Week, everyone, you know, in all walks of life, whatever, is to protect people, and you know, if your staff are healthy and feel okay, and the support around them is very important. I think that's really good. And I'll go back to Peter, because obviously a lot of health and safety is flagged up by our insurers, which every year we've got to go to with the green list and the red list. And it's good to see we're putting things in place and everything hopefully tick all the boxes when we come for the review in April. Yeah, thank you very much, and it's a really good report. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Any more comments? Thank you, Tom. A good report. It's showing we're on top of things and moving forward. The recommendation, ladies and gentlemen, is that we note the contents of the report. We move on to item 11, the quarterly performance scorecard. Welcome, Paul. It's up to you.
Good morning. Intended as a way of measuring corporate performance over time. It's evolving over time. We've done some work on it this time round, partly to separate it out from the wider business plan reporting, also to make it a bit more visually appealing. There's 1 or 2 new indicators in there as well. There's 4 indicators in there which are slightly behind, 2 of which are only minor. The 2 that aren't necessarily minor, there's one on core staff costs, which Pete kind of touched upon. So we did have a target about core staff costs not being more than 50%. That's becoming increasingly difficult because of what Pete's just gone through. So that might need a review in terms of that indicator. The other ones is about hedge laying. Apparently we haven't had many applications in. They've mostly been for walls rather than hedges. So that's the other one that's slightly adrift. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions.
No, it's just a comment really. I mean, presumably the hedges, you can get FIPL grants and things from that sort of thing. So it's a bit swings and roundabouts.
Yeah.
We'll be giving those grants and they're not coming for ours. So
Yes.
it may be inevitable, to be honest. I don't know.
It's also because we're measuring things quarterly. That's not a huge amount of time scale as well. So it may well correct next time, but we're just keeping an eye on it.
Just thankful for this report. So I think it is set up in a really good way, and even I can understand it. Well, bits of it.
Okay, it's evolving. I've got other plans for it as well. So
Just a quick point on hedge lanes. There are only 4 or 5 months of the year when you can lay a hedge.
yes,
So it could be a seasonal thing.
yes,
You
there's,
can't plant ahead in the
I know it's the same with the tree planting one. There's a target of 200 trees to be planted in the 2 quarters where it's 0. That's of course because you're going to plant trees certain times of the year. Yeah.
When it's freezing cold, not good. But yeah, I had the odd question about how we're behind target, but you've answered those already. So and it is laid out better so we can understand it far more easier than what it was before. And thank you very much. Any more questions for Paul? No? Well, thank you very much. I think we members just note the scorecard, and thank you very much. We move on to item 12, the corporate risk register that you as well, Tom.
I think I'm handing this over to Pete actually.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm picking up. I think Tom's. Oh, thanks, Simon. Sorry. So yeah, I'll go back over that. Just introducing the report and going through the risks in there. It's as presented. As mentioned, the finance one we've gone through, the health and safety one, Tom's just really covered in that report. Capacity, skills and resilience, just quite a bit of work going on there around some of the bits of restructures that have been done, some of the career development discussions that have commenced, and the staff survey that's now underway. One of the Woodsmith and Bulby mines, just again, the ongoing monitoring of those, and no major change there. And probably the only other one to draw some attention to is just that emerging risk, the Levisham estate. We don't have that as a specific risk, but we've added it into the report the last couple of times because of that emerging landslip risk. We've now tendered for that work, and over the winter, the solution will be being put in place, and monitoring of them be ongoing for 5 years. And officers don't consider that this needs adding as a separate item to the corporate risk register. Once that monitoring is in place, that's deemed to be the mitigation. It'll probably come off this report unless there's any exceptional updates required over the period that we're monitoring that.
Thanks, Pete. Apparently, even with all this wet weather, the landslip hasn't actually moved far at all. So good move. Yeah. Just on one point on where the 106 agreement at Bulby Mine, are those excess buildings coming down, or are we still in the process of it, or do we know what's?
I'll let Chris answer that because that sounds like an operational question. So.
Thanks, Pete. Yeah, Chair. There are a number of buildings that are already coming down. Regularisation. The main deconstruction is the 87-metre high shaft, which has until 2027 to come down. But we're in regular dialogue and meetings with them about that. If there's any discrepancy from that, and that of course is part of the permission that is required to happen, we'll obviously bring a report to members if there's any deviation from that.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thank you. Any more comments for Pete or Chris? No, thank you very much. The recommendation, members, is that members note the contents of the report and the appendix, making any comments they wish to. Thank you very much. You take it next one. Move on to item 13, which is carbon accounting for financial year 22-23.
Well, I think by default it is me. I was rather expecting Tom Stevenson to join it, but partly on the basis of that, even though I can cover it in general terms, I really can't deal with the specifics because it's not my area of expertise. But we do report our carbon emissions for the National Park Authority to FRASC annually. It does note at the end of the paper that we're due to bring a more strategic report to NPA in December, setting out our abatement strategy for the authority to reach our target of being net zero by 2030. But this reports on the progress made over the last financial year, particularly on scope 1 and 2 emissions, which are those that are directly generated by the authority in its activities, as opposed to those that come as a consequence of purchases that we made that are considered within scope 3. And you'll see that over the previous financial year, there was a reduction of scope 1 emissions by 41%, which is largely thanks to the change in heating arrangements at our 2 national park centres. Members will recall that we successfully secured funding under the public sector decarbonisation scheme with colleagues from the 2 district councils at the time, that enabled us to remove the oil fueled heating at both centres and move to air source and ground source heat pumps, and that reduced our scope 1 emissions from energy. There's also a reduction in fleet usage, which had a positive benefit as well. That said, they were offset slightly by the increase in electricity use that came as a result of the fact that we were using heat pumps rather than energy. But then the net effect has been a not insignificant reduction in terms of emissions. So we're on track towards meeting our interim target of 75% reduction by 2027. And you can see the breakdown in scope 1 and scope 2 emissions set out in table 1 on page 79. On page 80, the information is there about our scope 3 emissions, which are from essentially from stuff that the authority either buys in or come as a result of travel to and from work by authority staff. And you'll see there that we've also seen a reduction in emissions over the reporting period, and indeed from financial year to financial year. Like I say, in terms of going forward, we'll be bringing a report to NPA in December, looking at the trajectory for emissions to take us to net zero in the authority, and what that will require. I mean, ultimately, the authority will always, in our activities, be generating some form of emissions, and so the ability to get to net zero depends to some extent on our ability to offset in some shape or form, either through renewables or through offsetting through some land-based interventions. But we're certainly hopeful that things like, for example, moving to an electric vehicle fleet over the course of the next few years will make quite a significant impact in helping us achieve those reductions. We'll also be bringing a paper to NPA in December as well, looking at our wider policy in relation to climate change in respect to the national park, following some discussions that Jim Bailey and I have been involved in with UK national parks in relation to our wider commitment and leadership position in terms of climate change and carbon reduction for national parks as landscapes.
Thanks, Tom, for the update. we look forward to Tom Stevenson's report at NPA. But Patrick,
Thank you. Slightly left field question. Is fingers crossed we get the money for Lewisham. That's quite a lot of land we own. Could anyone do a calculation about how much carbon that bit of land absorbs? Because we're going to be net zero.
Yeah.
yes.
We might be able to, you just mentioned it in what you said, there'll be an offset. I suspect it will absorb quite a lot of carbon.
There will be an offset if we undertook further interventions over and above a baseline, because obviously it kind of contributes to a baseline for the national park area at the moment. But there is certainly, in our thinking around the Lincoln Lewisham project and the business case that we submitted as part of the application for landscape recovery, we talked about the kind of nature interventions that we're looking for, not just in our estate, but also Newtondale and the kind of wider contiguous area that would create better habitats for nature and biodiversity. But we also talked about the positive impacts in terms of climate change, which would come through some degree of woodland creation or natural regeneration of woodland, to an extent through allowing some changes in land management, but also peat restoration as well. A large part of the project, although not an authority land, is related to the reversion or conversion of what's currently forest land into peat bogs, which will also have a significant impact on the long term.
A good start.
Hell of a good start.
And I see Tom's joined us, so if there are any detailed questions, then
that may
it should do. Have do you want to? I know you haven't been, Tom. Would you like to? No worries. Tom actually took us through the report, so we have. We hear you are coming to NPA to give us a full rundown on it. Unless you have any burning issues you want to put forward, then. It's awkward, yeah.
It's all right. So I've covered the sort of headlines in terms of the report and the reduction that we're making over the last financial year, and the fact that we're on trajectory in terms of hitting our targets by 2027 and 2030.
Okay. Malcolm, sorry.
Yeah. As Tom just come in the room, we thought it was an excellent report, and I thought we ought to tell him that.
Yeah. Tom. Right, if we can, no more questions. Recommendation that members note the work done to establish accurate carbon reporting for authority emissions and identify methods to reduce authority emissions. Thank you very much. If we move on to item 14. Mid-tier treasury management review.
Yeah,
like another go, Pete.
Yeah, go out on a high. So this is the halfway through the year we bring a progress report on our treasury performance as we lay out in financial regulations. So the update is there. The one thing I'll say is there is an error in the report in 4.4 and 4.5 when numbers in 4.4 the updated September numbers aren't included. And at 4.5 it's slightly outdated. So just to give the updated numbers that ought to be in the report. In terms of the end of March in 4.4, that's right. But then at mid-September, it should read that we've got interest earned of 197,000 on a balance of 7 million, which is a return of 4.47%, as at September 23. So again, we can see that improving performance is very much linked to sort of the rates that we're seeing at the moment and that we can invest at. And then just in 4.5, the average return to 30th September of 1.64 is that 4.47%. So just those couple of updates, so apologies for that, members. Other than that, the report is very straightforward. There's no change to the prudential indicators in the appendix, and we aren't in breach of any of the prudential indicators. So there's just a couple of recommendations. One is to note the position on the authority's activities, and the other is to approve the revised prudential indicators for the period as in Appendix B, albeit without changes and no breaches.
Any questions, or do we take the recommended recommendations? Thank you very much. Thanks, Pete. If we can move in private second. If we move on into private session.